السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وضرب الله مثلا قرية كانت آمنة مطمئنة يأتيها رزقها رغدا من كل مكان فكفرت بأنعم الله فأذاقها الله لباس الجوع والخوف بما كانوا يصنعون. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Inshallah, today we are going to try to cover the first part of a two-part discussion on ayah number 112 of Surah An-Nahl. Surah An-Nahl is the 16th surah of the Quran, and this is one of a number of parables, examples that Allah gives in this surah. The other examples in this surah, and actually in the Mus'haf so far, I covered in my series last year. So we're technically beginning from this parable onwards. What I think is very important to note about this parable before we dive in is that Allah is giving us an example of what happens to a prosperous nation. The life cycle of a nation. How does a nation become successful? In the worldly sense. We're not just talking about it in the akhirah sense. In the worldly sense, how does a nation become successful? And how does that nation then end up losing that success and falling apart, collapsing, being invaded, etc. Basically, the decline, the rise and fall of a nation, right? And this is not just something Allah is saying, like I was establishing yesterday when we said, يَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ, that this is truth from their Rabb. Allah is not just giving us the story of one nation at some point in history. Allah is giving us a formula. And this formula is a constant. So just like something that was true in physics 500 years ago is still true in physics today, or something that was true in chemistry is still true in chemistry today, the formula works. If the components are still there, this formula still works. So if we internalize and learn from this formula, we can actually have another analysis of what happens to the rise and fall of nations. There are two lenses by which you can look at reality. You can look at reality from, I don't want to use the word secular, but you can use the word worldly. You can understand reality from a worldly lens, and you can also understand reality from a spiritual lens. There's two different lenses. And what Islam is teaching us and what the Quran is teaching us is actually to keep both lenses on. It's not saying you should only look at reality from a spiritual lens. And it's absolutely rejecting that you should only look at reality from a worldly material lens. So the Quran, Islam is not in rejection of science and political science and history and anthropology and sociology. Those are the worldly lenses. But then there's also a spiritual lens, right? So the thing is, when somebody is studying in university and they're studying political history, or in the case of the Muslims, the famous figure Ibn Khaldun, right? He studied so many nations and so much history, one of the earliest pioneer historians in the world. And he noticed some patterns in nations that rise and fall, and he made some observations. His observations were not spiritual observations. He was not studying the Quran and Sunnah or studying the stories of the prophets and then coming up with a formula. He was just observing nations, and he was observing what he believed was a scientific hypothesis of what happens when nations rise and what happens when nations fall. The Quran will not deny that. The Quran will enhance our view by adding, so there's one lens that's material, and you add to it another lens that's spiritual, so now you get a different perspective, right? You get this X-ray vision. You can see through things that otherwise the material lens could not have seen. This is why studying our deen alongside studying sciences is so crucial. Right? What does secularism mean? Secularism means that religion is separated from every other exploration in life. Right? Science is something else, religion is something else. Politics is something else, religion is something else. Psychology is something else, religion is something else, etc., etc. Every area of human life is separate. Religion is just one of those areas. It's just one shelf. But what our religion is doing is saying, once you understand the Qur'an's, the revelation's intent, then every other shelf gets affected. You start seeing it differently. You see what you originally saw, but you have an enhanced view of it. You have a more developed view of the same thing that you saw before. So from that, I want to start actually, before we get to the ayah, I want to tell you something about Ibn Khaldun's formula, what he developed as a formula of what he thinks how nations rise and how nations fall. And he said it in a much more articulate way. I'm giving you the dumb version, but you can read up on this yourself, inshallah. So essentially what he's saying is that there is a group of people that are not very advanced, but they are like, imagine there's a village or a tribe, but they're very close to each other. You know, like families in the tribal areas, they're much more united, right? And they defend each other and they stand by each other and they're helpful to each other. All the neighbors know everybody kind of thing. They're more unified as a people. And when they are unified as a cause, then they decide to expand or to grow. And because they are so committed to each other, even though they're a small force, they are a powerful force because of their unity. And they're able to grow and grow and grow until they might even rebel against a larger power and take over. They can become that powerful. Only because they are so united internally. So once they become a power, then they start establishing a new kind of government, a new kind of structure, based on their original vision and principles. Once that happens, and the nation that used to be weak, materially weak, but socially strong together, asabiya he calls it, a strong sense of unity. Once they develop that power over time, people don't have the same connection to each other anymore. People are now part of a larger, more powerful civilization, and they are connected because they're all citizens of the same nation, but the neighbors don't know each other like that anymore. And the families don't know each other like that anymore. The unity is now kind of weakened. Even though on the looks of things, the buildings are bigger and the roads are more impressive and the military is huge. So it looks stronger by appearance, but actually as far as the cohesion of the people, the asabiya of the people, it's gone. Or it's disappearing. And when it starts disappearing, groups start forming and they start becoming suspicious of each other and the politics start getting corrupted and there's infighting starts happening and political ideologies start separating. Things you never imagined in the village are now happening with the children of those people and they're going at each other's throats, right? Once that happens, that nation actually, even if it looks strong, it's actually become weak. Because they're becoming more and more and more individualistic. Everybody's looking out for themselves. They're not looking out for the tribe. They're looking out for themselves in the end, right? And when that happens, another group that is small and a village and very united says, there's an opportunity here. These people are weak. And they come and they take over. And the cycle starts all over again. The weak take over. They become the power. They grow and advance, and then their unity collapses, and there you go, again and again. An even simpler way of thinking about it is something, an old saying that, again, I'll butcher it, but you probably heard it many, many times, that tough times create strong people. And strong people create good times. And good times create weak people. And weak people create tough times. And the cycle repeats itself. And that's something you can see. I mean, we see it here in the United States firsthand. We're in the middle of, this cycle. Nations have seen this cycle all over the world. Every time I go to the United Kingdom a lot. I don't know why they call it a kingdom anymore, but still. I go to the UK a lot. And every time I go there, I just stare out the window because their streets are ugly. Their buildings are ugly. Their neighborhoods are ugly. Everything's ugly in England. The only thing nice about England is when you leave the city and it's nice fields, right? And I stare at this place and I say, man, you guys took over almost the entire planet. You couldn't build a nicer house? Like you could, something happened here, right? How did these people, and it's a little tiny speck on the map. It's nothing. It's a little island. And they took over the entire planet somehow. The mighty British Empire, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And now back squeezed again, right? SubhanAllah. So there is this life cycle of nations that in a secular sense you can study. But now today we're going to look at the Qur'an's lens of that, of the prosperous nation. And that's what Allah describes in this ayah. This is ayah number 112 of Surah An-Nahl. So Allah says, وَضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا, and Allah has struck an example. qaryatan, an example of a town, a village, a city. Qarya can be a society. You can look at it like that. Okay, a society. كانت آمنة مطمئنة. A city that had been, or a town that had been safe and calm. We're going to explore the words safe and calm. This is the two descriptions Allah is giving of this society. Amina suggests that they are safe from outside attacks. They're safe and secure. They have no issues. They have no issues in terms of homeland security, or terrorism, or invasion, or cyber attack, or whatever else. In the ancient world, that maybe there's a town that on the one side there's ocean and mountains, so they can't be attacked from that side, right? Or they have some other natural barriers that protect them from being attacked. Or they have allies on sides of their border, so they don't have to worry about being invaded, etc., etc. So they're politically and militarily secure, amina. But just because you're secure and safe doesn't mean that life is good. Safety is one part of the problem. There's another part of the problem, and that is, are there good jobs? Is there good income? Is business successful? How's the economy doing? Can you actually get a good education? Can you actually get a good career after you get your education? What happens in many places in the world where there's a tough economy? Even though there's safety, there's not as much crime, but even if it's safe, but there's not good jobs, young people want to immediately leave and go find a job somewhere else and go, work somewhere else, etc., right? And there are places, for example, for instance, India is an interesting example. It's overall a stable country. With all of its problems, it's a stable country, right? But it's a highly, highly competitive economy. It's a highly competitive economy. So even for one job, you might have 1,000 people applying for the same job. And even if you graduated at the top of your class, it's not easy for you to just get into the workplace, right? So one of the dreams of the young Indian man or woman is to get a job abroad somewhere where there is far less competition. There's far, far less competition, right? So what happens, even if a state is amina, even if it's technically safe, it may not be mutma'inna. And the economy is one part of that. Allah is describing a country or a state or a village that is safe and it's also calm. Calm means you don't want to leave here. Calm actually means things are settled. It also means from a safety perspective, there's outside threats. Outside threats are covered in amina. And there are inside threats, and the inside threats are covered in mutma'inna. So from international issues solved, domestic issues solved. By the way, even to this day, whenever there's an election in any country, what are the two issues every candidate in the world is talking about? National security, the economy. This one is good on security, but he's bad for the economy. This one's tough on security, good for the economy. Security, economy, security, economy, security, economy. You could have 100 other issues. America could talk about abortion or LGBT or whatever else. What do people in the end actually care about? Security and economy. That's it. Is it amina? Who's going to give us amina mutma'inna? Just give me that. Nothing else matters in the end, right? And when you ask people why did they vote for this person or that person, their answer will either come back to amina or it will come back to mutma'inna. So Allah has pinpointed at the core a society that is doing well on both of those fronts. Now imagine a society that doesn't have to worry about security, and imagine a society where the economy is so good, and life is so good, and the weather is so good, and the neighborhoods are so good, and the schools are so good, that even people growing up in that society say, yeah, even if I had a chance to move anywhere in the world, I wouldn't leave here. I'd rather be here. This is the place to be. It's such an amazing place that others would want to come here, but we wouldn't want to leave. Kind of thing, right? That's aminatan mutma'inna. Now Allah describes further, and by the way, mutma'inna, tama'na in Arabic is a really interesting word, and naqa is also amina is also an interesting word. Naqatun amun, a camel that is very strong, muscular, is actually called naqatun amun, from the word amun. So the strength of a nation is captured inside aman. Also, by the way, what's an amana? Easy Arabic word that many English speakers also know. What's an amana? Anybody know? You can say it. It's okay. It's halal. It's not a khutbah. Your good deeds will not be wasted away if you open your mouth. What's an amana? If I give you an amana, what's that? I trusted you with something. That's because you're going to keep it secure. The idea of something being secure is it's an aman. It's handed to you because you're trustable. You're going to be safe with it. So the nation is safe. The tama'nina or itmi'nan, tama'nat al-ard, or tam'anat al-ard, is when the earth was supposed to be like jagged or rocky or up and down, and somebody came and they leveled it. Right? The natural state of the land was it was uneven, and then it was made level. Inkhafadat al-ard. And that's tama'ninatul ard. The idea being a society otherwise would have been unstable. But they did something in that society to stabilize it. Like they had, if we were living in America 150 years ago, right, and we were coming out of the reels of one civil war, getting ready for another one, or just fighting off the British, etc. There's no tama'nina yet, right? But coming out of World War II, what's there in the United States? There's a tama'nina. Things are stabilized. Now there's a ruffle again, right? But that is the idea of tama'nina. So now both of those are covered. What's next? Allah says, يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ. If that wasn't good enough, that this nation is doing so well, Allah says, it's rizq. Rizq, it comes to it from everywhere. Min kulli makan, from all kinds of places. So imagine they have a seaport, imports are coming in from the sea, and they're able to export and import and make a lot of money off of their seaport. They have a natural highway or a pass through the mountains, and they're able to connect to other societies. They're getting goods, supplies, food, etc., etc. They have no issues receiving their provisions. I was reminded of the situation in Qatar some years ago. I don't know what the situation is now, but Qatar had a very serious milk problem because it's a desert society. So they actually literally had, they were flying in cows into Qatar because they don't have enough milk, right? Or Australia, when they were building their railroads, it was too hot. The bush, which they call the desert, they call it the bush. The side of one side of the country, Sydney, etc., and the other side, like Perth, Melbourne, etc. They're so far apart from each other, and there's jagged, terrible territory in between that's too hot to live. So they had to build a railroad system, and horses would die when they were trying to build the railroads. So they actually brought in camels, and they brought in the Afghan. 112, 115, 120 years ago, so many Afghanis moved to Australia to build the railroads. The railroads in Australia were built by the Afghanis. And there are masajid that are over 100 years old that are on the way, right? And many of the Australian indigenous folks, they don't even know that some of their ancestors are Afghan, actually. They're mixed with Afghans. So a lot of them, a lot of those generations were lost. But that nation was prosperous enough to bring whatever rizq they need from everywhere else too, right? To the point where actually they developed a camel problem. They brought so many camels, the camels started overbreeding. So they had to do a culling of the camels and stuff. Like they have to mass murder camels. And then eventually the Saudis and some other countries told them, hey, you've got some pretty good camels. Why don't you start shipping them to us? So now they actually export camels to the Khalij. It's a crazy world. But يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ. A society that's getting provisions from everywhere. They're getting all kinds of things sent to them, right? And that actually also suggests that they have other partners. They have international relations. Because rizq cannot come from your enemy, rizq has to come from your business partner. And you have to have safe pathways to be able to have a pipeline, whether it's oil or food or wheat or cotton or whatever is coming and going, it needs to pass through securely. So now Allah is describing a country that's not even secure by itself. Its economic interests are also secure. Its international relations are also secure. This is the best of the best of the best scenario that a nation can have. يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ. You'll notice also as I'm describing this, such brief language, and yet Allah covers such deep geopolitical, economic, domestic, international issues in just a couple of phrases. And we're just, a third of the way through the ayah. Now all of a sudden the climate changes. فَأَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ. And by the way, one other important conversation, Allah used the word town, qarya, which is a feminine word. And then He described the town as amina, feminine word. Mutma'inna, feminine word. يأتيها, feminine pronoun. رزقها, feminine pronoun. من كل مكان. Right? Everything is referring to the qarya, 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 qarya. Why? This is actually a way of doing shumul. Basically, sometimes the society is doing really, really well, but there's also a very poor class in that society. When I first came to the United States, I was 14 years old, and from the airport we went straight to the city, to New York City. And coming from Islamabad, where at nighttime, basically you don't go outside because you don't know if you're in society or you're in a jungle because it's pitch black outside, right? And I come into New York City, I'm looking at these buildings like, whoa, these people. But then you stay a couple of days in the city, and then you start running into homeless people. When you start running, and if you ever go to New York, because if those of you that have lived in Texas for too long, let me give you a New York pro tip. When you're walking down here by Walmart or wherever grocery store you're going, and somebody says, "Hey, how's it going?" They're like, "Going pretty good." "How's your Ramadan?" "How you doing, sir?" "How you doing, sir?" is a common thing out here in Texas, out in the South. If somebody says, "How you doing" in New York, run. Run. The next thing that's going to happen is not going to be good for you. Cross the street, run the other way, something. That is a red flag. You realize the buildings may be beautiful, and there may be billions, maybe trillions of dollars flowing through some of these streets, just through Wall Street, just through Midtown, just through some of these universities. The amount of wealth that is passing through that tiny island may dwarf entire nations in the world. But even within that island, just go down the street after 12 o'clock and you better be careful, because you'll see a disparity, a wealth disparity. Just go to some parts of the Bronx. In some parts of the Bronx, which you go uptown high enough, and you're in the Bronx area, if you're stopping at a red light, you better know your Ayatul Kursi. And you better make sure that red light turns green quick, because it's not the same. You're in a different country. You are in a different country. Go to Washington, D.C. You'll see a beautiful arch. Then you go to downtown Baltimore at nighttime. Oof. Go to Philadelphia, where UPenn is beautiful. It's gorgeous, historic buildings, etc. Hang out in Philadelphia a little bit later on at night. Or go a little bit further down the street to some of the neighborhoods. You won't believe you're in the United States. Wallahi al-azim, you will not believe you are in the first world country. You'll think you're in some kind of disaster zone or somewhere. The same country, there are parts of Louisiana, Ohio, there are parts of the Midwest where you travel and you're like, this is America? What is going on here? This is not the America you see on TV. This is something else entirely. And we're not that far. I mean, even Dallas, right? Dallas downtown is spectacular, and there are parts of Dallas, if you don't know, it's remarkable. The disparity is remarkable. The reason I'm bringing that up is the ayah says kanat. It's commenting on the entire society as if there was no lower class that was suffering. Everybody was doing well. It was through and through. It was doing well. There are some societies in the world where they're able to even help the lowest tier of their society be above a certain threshold, right? I saw some of that. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I saw some of that in Europe, for example. Like one of the craziest things I saw in Denmark was I went by a small town, and the guy sells strawberries. This is just last year. He sells strawberries, and he left the strawberries, the basket, and he left a weighing machine, and he left a box, a cardboard box to put the money in. And he's not there, back at 4 p.m., right? And people come, and they weigh the strawberries, and they put the money, and they go. And he doesn't care, because you know what? Why would somebody steal? And if they do, it's okay. And they don't steal. Right? I'm like, I should try that in Pakistan. With mangoes or something. Right? The honor system. Why not? You know what? A society has to be at a certain level of collective prosperity to be able to do things like that. It's completely mutma'inna. There's no security camera. There's no guard, etc. To not tell you who it was. I was in Pakistan driving, and I got a call from a scholar. Kahan pe ho? was like, where are you? I was like, I'm on this highway. He goes, pull over, I'm coming to get you. I was like, okay. So I was happy to meet him. And he's a famous scholar. And he came to meet me with a pickup truck with a bunch of guys with machine guns first. And then behind him is SUV. And behind them another pickup truck with a bunch of guys with machine guns. And that's just because he's a scholar and some people disagree with some things he says. Right? So he's got to have an entourage of like 20 armed guards to go back home to his village in the middle of nowhere. Right? That's the opposite of aminatan mutma'innatan ya'tiha rizquha min kulli makan. Right? Now we're in this beautiful, amazingly secure country that Allah has described, this town that Allah has described, and now things take a turn. Allah says, فَأَذَاقَهَا لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ أَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. What a thing to say. Allah says, actually before he says that, he says, فَكَفَرَتْ بِأَنْعُمِ اللَّهِ. Then that town, the whole society, became ungrateful for the favors of Allah. They became ungrateful for the favors of Allah. Today, I will not describe what does it mean to be ungrateful for the favors of Allah. That's tomorrow's job. But at least we know what the crime is, according to Allah. They became ungrateful for the favors of Allah. I'll only describe one thing today, which is the word ni'mah. The plural is an'um. An'um is a few favors of Allah. Ni'am is many favors. So even though they enjoyed such great prosperity, Allah is saying, Allah only has to open a couple of doors for you, for your society to flourish. There's not a million doors that need to open, a couple need to open, just an'um, not ni'am. And your society will be through the roof, through the skies. But anyway, ni'mah comes from the word nu'uma. Many of you are familiar with the name of a surah, Surah Al-An'am. What does an'am mean? Anybody know an'am? Cattle, right? Cattle is called an'am because they walk softly. Nu'uma actually has to do with gentleness and softness. And ni'mah is something that creates comfort, softness, ease. So the idea of an'umillah is Allah provided means by which life became soft and easy in that society. That's actually what the description here is. They were ungrateful for the an'um of Allah. By the way, when life is really good, how many people here moved from another state to Texas? Okay, so which means you came from a tough place. Because this is an easier life than probably where you came from, chances are. If you came like me from New York or the East Coast, then definitely there's a different an ease of lifestyle, for example. And many folks that moved, right, they were able to do things for themselves and their family after they moved that they were not able to do where they used to be, right? They were, working hard. Maybe they were working, even a blue-collar job, working at a factory, working in the taxi business, working at a grocery store, just, even commuting to work, getting pushed around on a bus or a train for an hour and a half back and forth every day, saving. Then even more than half their income is disappearing in taxes and parking tickets or whatever else. It's a crazy life. And you pull out of that, and then you're able to give your family a home, and you're able to give them a better education, and, the kinds of things that we didn't imagine in a different country or in a different state even, right? We're able to do that. The thing is, though, the next generation comes up. Now, for example, here in the East Plano, you have beautiful homes around the masjid, and these children, their normal is to be around a giant masjid. And their normal is to see beautiful apartments and homes. That's their normal. They don't know the life of, one guy living with 4 roommates, and they share, they take turns on who's going to sleep. Because the other guy's going to drive the taxi, and then it's your turn to sleep. And they don't know that life. They don't know the paper plate life. They don't know is today, can I afford 1 slice and 1 slice of pizza or 2 life? They don't know that life, right? They know what's in Mom, there's no orange juice in the fridge. I told you I hate apple juice. They know that life. What happens to that next generation? Do they start taking some of those things for granted? Do they become ungrateful for what they've actually got? You could see this at the individual level, right? And then you always give them when I was your age, we used to have to take the bus and we were standing in the snow and Dad, I heard the snow story 1,000 times. Come on, we're in Texas now, get over it, right? Oh, we're not in New York anymore, etc., etc. An entire society that forgets that there was a time where things were not easy. And it took work to build a nation that is prosperous. Nations that are prosperous don't just pop up. It takes sweat, toil, war, independence, freedom, revolution. And even to build a government structure that's going to sustain and building those business ties, all of that stuff none of that stuff happens automatically. But now that that's in place, isn't it easier for a society to start taking that for granted? We're number one. Well, because we are. Look at us. Look at our roads. Look at our streets. Did you build them? No, but we're still number one. I have nothing to do with it, but I'm still number one. You're proud off the back of the backs of the labor of the people who came before you, not yourself. And because everything's already in place, you don't have to work for it anymore. And so easily you could see Ibn Khaldun's theory. These people are not going to appreciate what they've been given. They're going to mess it up. Even at the individual level. Forget the societal level. We're talking about the level of society. Even at the individual level, there are people who had nothing and they built a business empire. I know people like that. I know people that were taxi drivers. They used to drive. I even met someone recently. They used to drive people to Wall Street and to the stock exchange. And eventually, in his career, he rang the bell on the stock exchange opening morning. That's a journey. That's a journey, right? There are people that have, they go eat pizza after owning a multi-million-dollar company. They go eat pizza at the place where they used to work and serve the pizza when they were in college or when they were in high school. There are people like that. But what happens if they die and they give the business to their son or daughter or their kids? What happens to that business? What happens to that empire? It starts collapsing. Why? Because they don't have the mindset. They don't have an appreciation of what it took to get this. You understand? This is why even kings that fought in revolutions and established a kingdom, when their son took over, what happened to the kingdom? Kafarat bi an'am Allah. So now tough times come. أَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. This is the last thing for today. Allah made them, the strangest phrase in this ayah, Allah made them taste the clothing of hunger and fear. Listen to this carefully. Allah made them taste the clothing of hunger and fear. Normally, nobody eats their clothes, right? Why is Allah mentioning tasting with what? Clothing. Tasting and clothing. This is actually what you can call in English a mixed metaphor. This is isti'ara tabaiyya and isti'ara asliya fused together. A mixed metaphor. So let's understand what the purpose of that is. Clothing is something that sticks to you. Clothing is something that has luzum on you. If you're wearing full body clothes, it's touching every part of your body, right? And taste is something temporary and it's the most intense. The most intense part of your meal is when you're tasting it. Once it's gone down your stomach, unless it was a really bad Pakistani restaurant, you no longer feel the consequences, right? It's gone, it's gone. You ate the thing, it's gone. The moment where you actually experienced it, truly experienced it, is when you were tasting it. So it's the most momentary part of the experience. But clothes, you're experiencing them all the time. Now imagine if you're wearing something itchy, or you're wearing something in the summer that's too hot, and it's a full thermal, like head to toe. You're wearing a whole thing. You know, one of those like wetsuits that scuba divers use? You're wearing one of those things and it's 100 degrees outside. What part of you is going to feel it? Every part of you. Every inch of your skin is tasting it. You understand? Allah is saying, taste may be here, but if your entire clothes are wrapped in discomfort, it's like every part of you is tasting something. So the word taste is now becoming, and it's not temporary, momentary anymore. If it's clothing, it's constant. What is this society tasting all of a sudden that's constant from every side? So Allah says, لِبَاسَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ فَأَذَاقَهُ اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. He made them taste the food, He made them taste the clothing of hunger and fear. Allah just described they were safe. They were safe. And they were economically calm, tranquil. Now the economic tranquility, the mutma'inna, has been replaced with ju', hunger. The shipments are no longer coming. There's a storm and the entire dock got destroyed. Or we got attacked on one of our pipelines and there's no more fuel. The trucks don't have any fuel. Or the wheat supply didn't come. The grocery stores don't have any bread. There's no eggs. There's no milk. There's no this. There's no that. There's a panic. Everybody, and the prices are skyrocketing, and people are quitting their jobs because there's a strike at the factory, and now the electricity is not working, and there's no gas at the gas stations, and there's no air conditioning, and the electricity is shutting. Oh my God! Oh my goodness! And people are terrified because first comes the hunger, and with the hunger comes terrible fear. Why? Because if there's an economic collapse. If there is an economic collapse and there's actual hunger, then people become desperate. And when people become desperate and they can't get their food for their family through legitimate means, how are they going to get it? They're going to shoot up somebody's house, break it and take it. First, libas al-ju', followed immediately by libas al-khawf. If you're living in a society where everybody's dying for food for their baby and you got a bottle of milk in your hand and you're just walking home, are you going to be terrified? Somebody's going to come and pop you and just take the bottle. Man, my family first. So libas al-ju' wal khawf. That same society that they said we'd rather live nowhere else. We would rather be here than anywhere else. All of a sudden, the entire scene has been flipped. They live every second in hunger and in fear. How do we know it's every second and from every direction? Because Allah said they taste food, clothing. And clothing touches every part. So it's like, it's not just one problem. It would be, the electricity went out, that's one problem. The gas is not available, that's one problem. There's a fuel shortage, that's another different problem. There's a food shortage, that's a different problem. The police isn't around, that's a different problem. But imagine all those problems all at the same time. This is itchy, this is itchy, this is itchy. If one part of your body is itchy, you can just scratch it. What happens when the whole body is itchy? What are you going to do? It's paralyzing. You're engulfed in it. You're completely engulfed in it. So this society that was taken care of from every direction, يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ, is now suffering from every direction. Exactly the opposite of what it used to have. One thing I didn't tell you about the word rizq before I let you go today. The word rizq is really important. Rizq, we commonly translate that as provision. In its original meaning, rizq actually has to do with taqwiyah. It has to do with strengthening. You know, Yusuf alayhi salam, when the two prisoners, he was telling them the story, he used the phrase طَعَامٌ تُرْزَقَانِهِ, food that is going to strengthen you, food that is going to replenish you. When Allah said about this town, يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ, its rizq comes from everywhere. Every time imports come, every time the ships dock, every time the camels come back, every time the caravan returns, actually, every time that society gets stronger, their military gets stronger, their economy gets stronger, their job market gets stronger. Every single day, things are actually getting better and more stable and more stable and more stable. And if the economic numbers are going up and the security establishment numbers are going up, you're looking at these charts, you're saying, there's no way this is going to fall apart. All the charts, all systems go. There's not even any orange. Everything is green, 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 green. There's no red flags. There's no red alert. And all of a sudden, without notice, أَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ. But Allah says, بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ, because of what they used to do. So now we see two reasons why this happened to them. The first reason was they were ungrateful for the favors of Allah. We don't know what that means in depth yet. But that is the reason Allah is giving. And the second is they used to do something. Those two reasons have been given in one ayah. This is why they were given these punishments. By the way, the next ayah will be about a messenger that came and warned them, and that's a different kind of punishment. So what we're reading about right now doesn't even have to do with prophets. Does not have to do with prophets came, they disbelieved in the prophets, and then Allah made them suffer, etc., etc. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about any nation that used to enjoy security and they committed two crimes. So we're going to have to understand those two crimes deeply. One, ingratitude of the favors of Allah, and two, something they used to do. بِمَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. They used to do it. And those are the reasons that society, as prosperous as it was, it collapsed. 5 minutes and I'm done. Please listen to this part extremely carefully. The first observation I want you to take with you, which we're going to build on tomorrow, is this is ayah number 112 of Surah An-Nahl. This is near the end of the surah. This is near the end of the surah. It's a very long Meccan surah. Allah has actually already told us, established in this surah, what does it mean to be grateful? And Allah has already established what kinds of behaviors do people do that are punishable. That's been elaborated throughout the surah in great detail. At the end, near the end of this surah, Allah is now saying these two things: they're ungrateful and they're up to no good. So by the time we get to this phrase, what's Allah already done? He's already given us a very deep education of what it means to be grateful and what kinds of behaviors to avoid. So what's our job tomorrow? Explore what happened in this surah when it talks about gratitude, so we can learn something about that. And what happens about, what is it referring to when it says this behavior that got them to their collapse? Because if you don't do that, and you look at this ayah, you say, well, what did they used to do? Allah didn't really say in this ayah. Where did He say it? It was a whole long surah that was dedicated to describing this phenomenon. That's one critical observation about this ayah that I want you to take home with you. The second observation, about this ayah that I would be missing something if I didn't share with you today, is that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us in مَا كَانُوا يَصْنَعُونَ. There are behaviors that society does very strategically. يَصْنَعُونَ. Sun'a is not just doing something, it's doing something with expertise. Doing something with expertise. If I drank a bottle of water, this is not sun'a. But if I designed a bottle of water, that would be sun'a. Sun'a. Societies exert a lot of expertise to build their strength. They exert a lot of expertise. The society that Allah just described, it didn't happen from fools. It happened with the sweat and labor and thought of experts. From the sunnah. They built that society. But it's so strange that Allah is saying the thing that they were building, as they were building this strong society, was already building their own destruction. Something was missing in what they were building. And the way to leave this in your mind as I leave you, imagine somebody who's designing a human body, and they make it look exactly like the human body. Replica, like the Madame Tussauds statues, right? Or those sculptures, right? And they're even down to veins and organs. They're able to replicate the image of the perfect human body. They're able to design that. What's missing? Life. You can't pour life, even if you designed it, you can't pour life into it. It's missing something. And if you don't have life in it, what's going to happen to the sculpture? It's going to collapse. Human beings will design amazing things with one lens, the material lens. And it'll look amazing. It'll look like the most amazing buildings in New York or the best highways you've ever seen. And you'll say, man, these people have everything. They're building something so amazing. They have so much sun'a, ma kanu yasna'un. But while they're building something materially that's so impressive, something is missing. Something is missing. Now the body is there, but the soul isn't there, right? The body may be impressive, but the soul isn't there. They're building a society where the economics are there, the politics are there, the social structures are there, the education systems are there, the infrastructure is there, the protection of the habitat is there. All of these things are there. That's all the body. What's missing? The soul is missing. And when the soul is missing, that body will decay just like a corpse that looks fresh. What's going to happen to the corpse? It's going to disintegrate. It's going to disintegrate. So there's a soul to a society, not just a body to a society. We get so impressed with the body of a society. Fir'aun used to say Musa alayhi salam is a threat because we have an amazing society. And he used to tell his people, protect this country from Musa because he will get rid of your amazing society. وَيَذْهَبَ بِطَرِيقَتِكُمُ الْمُثْلَى. Musa and Harun are going to destroy your amazing society. And by the way, to this day, tourists go and look at how amazing their society was. Because the body of that society was in fact amazing. But the reason it collapsed was not because the body wasn't well designed enough. The reason it collapsed was the soul of that society. I started with Ibn Khaldun's formula. You remember that? I'm going to end with Allah has the solution to Ibn Khaldun's problem. Ibn Khaldun presented a problem. Societies are bound to collapse when they become successful. They're bound to collapse. Allah is going to show us in this surah, how do you keep a society progressing and allow it to continue to stay progressing and not collapse? Look at what happened to the Muslims. Look at what happened to the Muslims in the last 500 years. Where were we 300 years ago, 400 years ago even? Many people here are from South Asia. The Mughals owned 25% of the GDP of the planet. 25% of the GDP of the planet. The British used to go to India to get a better life. The Europeans used to run away from Europe and go to India because the Muslims had a society where you had freedom of religion. Because you could be a Sikh, or you could be a Hindu, or a Christian, or a Jew, or a Shia, or a Sunni, or whatever else, and you can practice your religion and still flourish in that society. But if you were in Europe, if you're Catholic and you're walking down a Protestant street, you're going to get killed. If you're a Jew, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. That was Europe. And where did they couldn't understand what this thing is. Freedom of religion, the exploration of science, development, infrastructure, architecture. The architecture, when the British, when they came to India, they saw so much gold in the hands of the Muslims in their economy, the king thought they figured out a way to create gold. So he commissioned, in England, he commissioned scientists to receive the Arabic books from the Muslims to translate them so that we can learn chemistry, so we can learn to create gold. At Oxford and in Cambridge, they were Bible schools. Oxford was a Bible school. They only taught the Bible. How do you solve the problems of the world? Make dua, study the Bible. And the Muslims were studying their book and they were studying science. And they said, no, we need something else. The second department that was opened in Oxford after the Bible study was Arabic study. And the third was physics and chemistry. Because of the Arabic study. That's where we were. We were قَرْيَةً آمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنَّةً يَأْتِيهَا رِزْقُهَا مِنْ كُلِّ مَكَانٍ. And what happened over the last couple of hundred years? فَأَذَاقَهَا اللَّهُ لِبَاسَ الْجُوعِ وَالْخَوْفِ بِمَا كَانُوا. So we did something, I don't know. You could read this ayah and say, oh, this is talking about the kuffar. No, Allah is talking about any society. Any society. If they follow the wrong pathway, if they make the mistake, Allah does not make a distinction between whether a kafir makes the mistake or the Muslim makes the mistake. For us, at a societal level, do the crime, pay the price. If a Muslim overeats sugar and a kafir overeats sugar, you're both getting diabetes. Congratulations. The believer is not safe from diabetes. There's a sunnah of Allah. You can't escape it. And so tomorrow, inshallah, we'll explore these two pieces of the puzzle. What went wrong? And how we can learn from that and ensure that we don't repeat that mistake and are able to build a society that is prospering in this world and in the next. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.